Have you ever wondered who is really controlling your thoughts? Who decides what makes you angry, what makes you happy, what feels real? In 2025, the shadows on your screen are no longer just stories. They are carefully crafted reflections designed to shape your mind. What if your sense of freedom, your beliefs, your dreams, were all whispers of an algorithm? And what if stepping outside this digital cave meant questioning everything you've ever trusted, including yourself? In a world that tells you you're awake, how do you know you're not still chained to illusions? Are you living your life, or is your life living you? Welcome to Silent Mind Diaries, where silence speaks louder than noise, and awareness is the ultimate rebellion. Plato once imagined a cave where prisoners mistook shadows for reality, but today, the shadows are brighter than ever. They glow on our screens, follow us everywhere, and whisper constantly. Every like, every scroll, every recommendation nudges us closer to a life curated, predicted, and controlled. The chains are invisible, but they are real. This isn't just philosophy anymore. It's a call to wake up, to see the patterns behind your thoughts, to reclaim the freedom you didn't even know was stolen. Because once you step outside the cave, nothing will ever feel the same again. When Plato composed his Allegory of the Cave in approximately 380 BCE, he could not have imagined the glowing rectangles that would dominate human attention 2 millennia later. Yet the philosophical architecture he constructed, a meditation on perception, reality, and the mechanisms that constrain human understanding, has never been more relevant than in our current digital age. The cave, once a metaphor rendered in firelight and stone, now manifests in pixels and algorithms, in endless feeds and curated realities that shape billions of lives every moment of every day. The transition from Plato's ancient allegory to our contemporary digital existence is not merely a matter of technological advancement. It represents a fundamental evolution in how illusions are constructed and maintained. Where Plato's prisoners were bound by physical chains and limited by the crude technology of shadow casting, today's inhabitants of the digital cave are tethered by invisible threads of psychological conditioning, data harvesting, and computational prediction. The shadows on the wall have been replaced by an infinitely more sophisticated apparatus of representation, one that adapts to each viewer, learns from their responses, and constantly refines its ability to captivate attention. To understand this transformation, we must first acknowledge what has remained constant across these 24 centuries. Both the ancient cave and the modern screen function as mediating surfaces between the observer and reality itself. Both create environments where representation is mistaken for truth, where the image supplants the thing itself, and where the mechanisms of illusion remain hidden from those who consume its products. In Plato's cave, the prisoners could not see the fire behind them, nor the puppeteers who manipulated the objects casting shadows. In our digital cave, users rarely comprehend the algorithmic infrastructure that determines what appears on their screens, nor do they grasp the commercial and ideological interests that shape these computational systems. However, the differences between these two caves are equally significant and demand careful analysis. Plato's cave was characterized by its universality and uniformity. All prisoners saw the same shadows, experienced the same limited reality, and were subjected to identical constraints. The modern digital cave, by contrast, is radically personalized. Each user inhabits a unique version of the cave, sees different shadows, and experiences a customized reality tailored to their psychological profile, behavioral patterns, and predictive models. This personalization represents both a technological achievement and a philosophical crisis, as it fragments shared reality itself and makes collective understanding increasingly difficult to achieve. The technological substrate of our contemporary cave merits detailed examination. Where Plato required only fire, chains, and a wall to construct his allegory, the modern apparatus involves billions of interconnected devices, submarine cables carrying data across oceans, vast server farms consuming enormous quantities of energy, and sophisticated artificial intelligence systems processing exabytes of information. This infrastructure operates largely invisibly, humming away in climate-controlled facilities far removed from the users whose experiences it shapes. The very scale and complexity of this system makes it nearly impossible for any individual to comprehend fully, creating a new form of epistemic limitation. We are prevented from understanding not by physical chains, but by cognitive impossibility. The social architecture surrounding the digital cave also differs markedly from Plato's original conception. In the ancient allegory, the prisoners were placed in the cave by others and remained there against their will. The person who escapes and glimpses true reality does so through liberation, breaking free from imposed constraints. In our digital age, by contrast, billions of people voluntarily enter the cave multiple times daily, reaching for their devices within moments of waking. The chains are self-administered, the shadows eagerly consumed. This willing participation fundamentally alters the philosophical dynamics of the allegory. The question is no longer how to liberate the unwilling prisoner, but how to awaken the desire for liberation in those who have come to love their chains. The sensory experience of each cave also reveals important distinctions. Plato's prisoners experienced a poverty of stimulation, shadows on a wall, echoes of sounds, the monotony of unchanging imprisonment. The modern digital cave, conversely, offers a superabundance of stimulation, infinite content, constant novelty, algorithmic variation designed to prevent habituation and maintain engagement. This shift from scarcity to abundance creates new philosophical problems. Where Plato could assume that exposure to the richer reality outside the cave would naturally appeal to the liberated prisoner, in our age of informational excess, reality itself may seem boring or overwhelming compared to the carefully optimized experiences offered by digital platforms. The temporal dimensions of these two caves differ substantially as well.
Plato's cave existed in a relatively static state. The shadows might change from day to day, but the fundamental structure remained constant across time. The digital cave, however, evolves continuously. Algorithms are updated hourly, content strategies shift in response to engagement metrics, and the entire system learns and adapts based on aggregate user behavior. This creates a moving target for philosophical analysis and ethical critique. By the time a particular feature or dynamic has been identified and understood, the system may have already evolved beyond that configuration. The economic foundations supporting these structures also demand comparison. Plato's cave required minimal resources to maintain: a fire, some objects to cast shadows, guards to prevent escape. The modern digital cave represents one of the largest economic enterprises in human history, with technology companies achieving market capitalizations that exceed the GDP of most nations. This enormous economic investment creates powerful incentives to keep users engaged within the cave, to prevent them from seeking alternative realities, and to continuously refine the mechanisms of attention capture. The profit motive becomes inextricably woven into the epistemic structure itself. Furthermore, the purpose and intentionality behind each cave differ in philosophically significant ways. Plato's cave, in his allegory, served primarily as a thought experiment to illustrate epistemological principles. It was not presented as a description of an actual institution deliberately to deceive. The modern digital cave, while rarely explicitly framed as a deception apparatus, is nonetheless engineered with specific goals: maximizing user engagement, extracting behavioral data, and ultimately converting attention into advertising revenue. The shadows on our screens are not accidental byproducts, but carefully designed products, A/B tested and optimized for their ability to capture and hold human consciousness. The relationship between the individual and the collective also manifests differently in these two scenarios. In Plato's cave, the prisoners formed a community bound by shared experience and common illusion. They could discuss what they saw, develop collective interpretations, and form social bonds based on their mutual reality. The digital cave, despite connecting billions of users, often produces isolation rather than genuine community. Each person's feed is unique, their shadow reality is personalized, and meaningful communication becomes difficult when individuals lack a shared baseline of experience and information. The question of escape and liberation takes on new dimensions as well. In Plato's Allegory, physical escape was possible. The chains could be broken, the prisoner could turn around, climb out of the cave, and see the sun. The path was difficult and painful, but it was achievable. Escape from the digital cave is far more ambiguous. Does it mean deleting one's accounts, abandoning all digital devices, attempting to access unfiltered information? Each of these potential solutions faces immediate practical difficulties in a society where digital participation has become nearly mandatory for employment, education, and social connection. The cave has expanded to encompass so much of life that escape may no longer be a meaningful option. The authority figures in each system also warrant examination. Plato's cave implied the existence of puppet masters, individuals who controlled what shadows were cast and who maintained the prisoner's captivity. These figures could potentially be confronted, persuaded, or overthrown. The modern digital cave has no such clear antagonists. The engineers who design algorithms, the executives who set corporate strategy, the advertisers who purchase targeted access to users, none of these actors individually controls the system, and most genuinely believe they are providing valuable services. The distributed nature of responsibility in the digital cave makes ethical accountability far more difficult to assign and enforce. This reimagination of the cave for the digital age reveals a fundamental insight. Technological change has not rendered Plato's philosophical framework obsolete. Rather, it has intensified the very dynamics he sought to illuminate. We are not less prone to mistaking shadows for reality in 2025. We are more sophisticated in our self-deception, more comfortable in our chains, and more resistant to liberation. The cave has not disappeared. It has become invisible, ubiquitous, and seductive in ways that would have astonished even Plato's pessimistic imagination. As we proceed to examine the original allegory in detail, we must hold in mind this fundamental parallel. Whether the shadows are cast by firelight or rendered by machine learning algorithms, whether the chains are forged from iron or woven from behavioral data, the central philosophical question remains unchanged. How do we distinguish appearance from reality when the very apparatus of our perception has been shaped by forces beyond our understanding? And perhaps more troublingly, how do we motivate the pursuit of truth when illusion has become so comfortable, so convenient, and so compellingly designed?
Plato's original allegory, what the cave truly symbolized. To properly evaluate the relevance of Plato's cave to our digital age, we must first understand what the allegory originally represented within the broader framework of Platonic philosophy. The allegory of the cave appears in Book 7 of the Republic, Plato's extensive dialogue on justice, politics, and the ideal state. It was not presented as an isolated parable, but as an integral component of Plato's epistemology, his theory of knowledge, and his metaphysics, his understanding of the fundamental nature of reality. In the allegory, Plato asks us to imagine a group of people who have been in prison since childhood in an underground cave. These prisoners are chained in such a way that they cannot turn their heads and can only see the wall directly in front of them. Behind them burns a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners, there is a raised walkway where puppeteers carry various objects, statues of people and animals, artifacts of all kinds. The fire projects shadows of these objects onto the wall that the prisoners face, and these shadows constitute the entirety of reality for the captives. Because the prisoners have never known any other existence, they naturally assume that these shadows are real objects, not mere representations. They develop sophisticated knowledge systems about the shadows. They learn to predict which shadows will appear when, they develop names for different types of shadows, they honor those among them who are most skilled at understanding and predicting shadow behavior. Their entire intellectual and social world is constructed around these flickering images, and they have no conception that a richer, more fundamental reality exists beyond their limited perception. Plato then asks us to imagine that one prisoner is freed from their chains and compelled to stand up and turn around. This liberation is immediately painful. The prisoner's legs are cramped from lifelong immobility, their eyes are blinded by the direct light of the fire they have never seen before. If shown the actual objects whose shadows they have been watching, the prisoner would initially be confused and might even insist that the shadows are more real than the objects themselves. The familiar illusion would seem more authentic than the unfamiliar reality. If this freed prisoner were then dragged forcefully up the steep and rough passage out of the cave, the discomfort would intensify. Emerging into the sunlight of the world above would cause intense pain. The prisoner would be unable to see anything at all at first, completely blinded by brightness. Only gradually would they be able to look at reflections in water, then at objects themselves, and finally at the sun itself, which Plato identifies with the form of the good, the ultimate source of truth and reality. Having glimpsed true reality, the freed prisoner would pity those still in the cave and feel compelled to return to liberate them. However, upon descending back into the darkness, the prisoner would again experience temporary blindness, this time from adjusting to dimness rather than brightness. The other prisoners, seeing this person stumbling and struggling to readjust, would conclude that the journey upward had ruined them. They would resist any attempts at liberation, and if anyone tried to free them forcibly, they would be willing to kill that person rather than face the painful journey out of the cave. The philosophical richness of this allegory operates on multiple levels simultaneously, each of which illuminates important aspects of Plato's worldview and continues to offer insight into contemporary epistemological problems. First and most fundamentally, the allegory presents a hierarchical theory of reality and knowledge. Plato distinguishes between the visible realm, the world perceived through the senses, and the intelligible realm, the world understood through reason and intellect. The shadows on the cave wall represent the lowest level of reality, mere images and reflections, doubly removed from truth. The objects casting the shadows represent the physical things we encounter in daily sensory experience. The fire represents the sun as it appears within our ordinary world. The journey out of the cave represents the ascent from sensory knowledge to intellectual understanding, and the sun outside the cave represents the form of the good, the highest principle of reality and knowledge in Plato's philosophy. This hierarchical structure reflects Plato's famous theory of forms, which holds that the physical objects we perceive are imperfect copies of eternal, unchanging forms or ideas that exist in a transcendent realm. A particular beautiful object is beautiful only because it participates in the form of beauty itself. A just action is just only because it approximates the form of justice. The forms represent perfect, eternal truths, while the physical world is characterized by change, imperfection, and deception. The cave allegory illustrates this metaphysical hierarchy. The prisoners mistake images for reality because they have no access to the higher levels of being that would allow them to recognize the shadows for what they truly are. The epistemological implications of the allegory are equally profound. Plato distinguishes between opinion, doxa, and knowledge, episteme.
Opinion is the mental state of those who rely on sensory perception and mistake appearances for reality. The prisoners who believe the shadows are real exemplify this condition. Knowledge, by contrast, requires understanding the forms through rational inquiry and philosophical contemplation. The journey out of the cave represents the philosophical education necessary to move from opinion to knowledge, from ignorance to wisdom. Importantly, Plato emphasizes that this education is not merely a matter of acquiring new information, but involves a fundamental reorientation of the soul. The prisoners are not chained only physically, but psychologically. They have developed entire conceptual frameworks, social practices, and value systems based on the shadows. Liberation requires not just new sense data, but a complete transformation of how one thinks, what one values, and how one understands the relationship between appearance and reality. This explains why the freed prisoner initially resists, preferring the familiar shadows to the challenging reality. The allegory also carries significant political and ethical dimensions. Plato wrote the Republic partly in response to the execution of his teacher Socrates, who was condemned to death by Athenian democracy for allegedly corrupting the youth and introducing false gods. In the allegory, the prisoner who returns to the cave to liberate others faces hostility and potential violence, a clear parallel to Socrates' fate.
Plato thus critiques democratic politics, suggesting that the masses, like the prisoners, are trapped in illusion and will resist those who attempt to lead them toward truth. This elitist element of Plato's thought has been controversial throughout history, but it reflects his deep conviction that wisdom is rare and that genuine knowledge requires extensive training that most people neither undertake nor value. The ethical implications extend further. For Plato, the purpose of philosophy is not merely personal enlightenment, but social responsibility. The freed prisoner who has glimpsed the sun has an obligation to return to the cave, despite the difficulty and danger. True philosophers, in Plato's vision, must reluctantly accept the burden of political leadership, applying their knowledge of the good to create a just society. This vision of the philosopher king, the wise ruler who understands true reality and governs accordingly, forms a central argument in the Republic and relies heavily on the metaphysical and epistemological framework established by the cave allegory. The allegory also addresses the problem of education in a sophisticated way. Plato suggests that education is not like pouring knowledge into an empty vessel, but more like turning the entire person toward the light.
The prisoners have eyes capable of seeing reality, but these eyes are directed toward shadows. Education must redirect attention and cultivate the capacity for genuine understanding. This view has influenced educational philosophy for centuries and remains relevant to contemporary debates about whether education should focus on transmitting information or developing critical thinking capacities. Furthermore, the allegory explores the relationship between the individual and society. The prisoners constitute a community with shared beliefs, practices, and authorities. Those skilled at predicting shadows are honored and rewarded. This social dimension makes liberation even more difficult, as leaving the cave means abandoning not just false beliefs, but an entire social identity and set of relationships. The freed prisoner faces isolation and incomprehension, unable to communicate effectively with those still trapped in illusion. This captures a perennial tension in philosophy between the pursuit of individual truth and the maintenance of social belonging. The role of coercion in the allegory is also philosophically significant. The prisoner is freed by force, dragged painfully up the passage, compelled to look at what they would prefer to avoid. This raises difficult questions about paternalism and authority. Is it justified to force someone toward truth against their will? Can education ever be gentle when it requires the destruction of comfortable illusions? Plato's inclusion of compulsion suggests his belief that human beings naturally resist the difficult work of philosophical enlightenment and may need external pressure to overcome their own limitations. The sensory metaphors in the allegory, light and darkness, sight and blindness, also carry deep philosophical significance. For Plato, sight is the highest sense, most closely associated with reason and understanding. The journey from darkness to light represents the movement from ignorance to knowledge, from mere opinion to genuine understanding. The temporary blindness that accompanies both ascent and descent illustrates how any transition between different epistemic states involves disorientation and difficulty. Wisdom cannot be achieved instantaneously, but requires gradual adaptation to new levels of reality. The allegory's treatment of time and permanence deserves attention as well. The shadows are fleeting, constantly changing, lacking stable identity. The objects casting shadows are more permanent, but still subject to decay and alteration. The fire fluctuates. Only the sun and the forms it represents are eternal and unchanging.
This metaphysical hierarchy suggests that true knowledge must be of permanent truths rather than transient appearances, a view that has shaped Western philosophy's emphasis on universal principles over particular facts. Moreover, the allegory illuminates Plato's understanding of pleasure and desire. The prisoners are presumably content in their ignorance. They have adapted to cave life and find satisfaction in their limited existence. The freed prisoner experiences pain throughout the liberation process and finds little immediate pleasure in truth. Only after extensive habituation does the world outside the cave become preferable. This suggests that genuine goodness and true pleasure may not coincide with immediate gratification.
and that philosophy requires renouncing comfortable illusions for more valuable but initially unpleasant truths. The allegory structure as a story within a story within a story is also significant. Plato presents this as something Socrates tells to Glaucon within a dialogue that Plato wrote for readers. Each level of narrative creates distance and invites reflection on the nature of representation itself. Just as the prisoners mistake shadows for reality, readers might mistake Plato's written words for Socrates' actual speech, or Socrates' allegory for literal truth. The nested structure thus enacts the very epistemological problems it describes, forcing readers to think carefully about the relationship between representation and reality. Finally, the allegory raises fundamental questions about the possibility and nature of communication across epistemic divides. The freed prisoner cannot effectively convey the reality they have witnessed to those still imprisoned. Language has been developed within the cave to describe shadows, and that same language cannot adequately capture the sunlit world outside. This suggests inherent limitations in our ability to communicate transcendent truths through ordinary language, a problem that has preoccupied philosophers and mystics for millennia. Understanding these multiple dimensions of Plato's original allegory provides essential context for evaluating its application to digital technology. When we describe algorithms and social media as cave-like, we are invoking this rich philosophical framework, a theory of reality, knowledge, education, politics, ethics, and human psychology. The allegory's enduring power lies not in any single interpretation, but in its capacity to illuminate the fundamental structures of human epistemic limitation across radically different technological and social conditions. With this foundation established, we can now turn to the specific mechanisms through which contemporary digital systems construct modern shadows on algorithmic walls.
Prisoners of the feed, how algorithms shape what we see. The contemporary information landscape is fundamentally algorithmic. Unlike the pre-digital era, when content consumption was largely determined by human editorial decisions, newspaper editors selecting which stories to print, television producers choosing which programs to broadcast, librarians deciding which books to acquire, the majority of information that billions of people encounter daily is now selected and ordered by computational systems. These algorithmic recommendation engines have become the primary gatekeepers of knowledge, culture, and public discourse in the 21st century. Understanding how these systems function and what assumptions they embody is essential to grasping how modern digital technologies construct cave-like epistemic environments. At the most basic level, an algorithm is simply a set of instructions for solving a problem or completing a task. In the context of content recommendation, algorithms are designed to answer a seemingly simple question: what should this particular user see next? However, the apparent simplicity of this question masks extraordinary complexity. Every second, billions of potential content items exist that could be shown to any given user. Posts from friends and strangers, news articles from thousands of publications, videos on every conceivable topic, advertisements for millions of products, sponsored content from countless organizations. The algorithmic system must filter this overwhelming abundance down to a manageable stream tailored to each individual user. To accomplish this filtering, algorithms rely on vast quantities of data about the user, data about content items, and data about how users in general interact with various types of content. User data includes explicit information like age, location, and stated interests, but more importantly, it includes behavioral data. Every click, like, share, search, pause, scroll speed, and duration of attention is logged and analyzed. This creates a detailed behavioral profile that can predict future actions with surprising accuracy. Content data includes not just the obvious categories and topics, but sophisticated analysis of linguistic patterns, visual elements, emotional valence, and engagement metrics from previous audiences. The fundamental logic underlying most content recommendation algorithms can be understood through a relatively simple framework, even though the actual implementations involve sophisticated machine learning systems. The algorithm attempts to maximize a particular objective function, usually some measure of user engagement like time spent on platform, number of clicks, or probability of returning to the platform.
The system is trained on historical data,
learning patterns about which types of content have successfully engaged users in the past, and then applies these learned patterns to predict what content is most likely to engage the current user in the future. This optimization process has profound implications for what content gets amplified and what gets suppressed. Content that generates strong emotional responses, particularly anger, outrage, or anxiety, tends to generate higher engagement metrics than more balanced or nuanced content. Sensational headlines outperform careful analysis. Short-form content that can be consumed quickly typically generates more interactions than long-form content requiring sustained attention. Visual content generally outperforms text-only content. Content that confirms existing beliefs is more likely to be engaged with than content that challenges those beliefs. The algorithm learns these patterns from aggregate data and then systematically prioritizes content with these characteristics. Crucially, the algorithm does not evaluate content based on accuracy, importance, social value, or contribution to informed citizenship. These qualities are invisible to the system unless they happen to correlate with engagement metrics. A well-researched investigative journalism piece that takes 20 minutes to read and challenges the reader's assumptions will typically receive less algorithmic amplification than a 2-minute video making sensational but unverified claims that confirm popular prejudices. The algorithm is not deliberately promoting misinformation or suppressing truth. It is simply optimizing for engagement, and truth does not always engage. The machine learning techniques that power modern recommendation systems add additional layers of complexity and opacity. Deep learning neural networks can identify patterns in data that humans cannot articulate and may not even recognize. These systems might discover, for instance, that users who watch certain types of videos in a particular sequence at specific times of day are statistically more likely to remain on the platform for extended periods. The algorithm will then systematically create these conditions for users who match the relevant profile, even though no human programmer explicitly instructed it to do so, and even though the reasons why these patterns produce engagement may remain mysterious. This opacity creates what scholars call the black box problem. Even the engineers who design these systems often cannot fully explain why a particular piece of content was recommended to a particular user at a particular moment.
The decision emerges from millions of weighted parameters in a neural network, trained on billions of data points, operating at timescales that preclude human oversight of individual decisions. Users are thus subject to editorial decisions that are simultaneously deeply consequential and fundamentally inscrutable. The personalization dimension of algorithmic curation intensifies these dynamics. Unlike traditional mass media, which presented the same content to large audiences, algorithmic platforms create what legal scholar Cass Sunstein called the daily me, an information environment uniquely tailored to each individual. This personalization operates at multiple scales. At the coarsest level, the algorithm might determine that a user is interested in sports rather than politics and weight content recommendations accordingly. At a more refined level, it might determine that this user prefers basketball to football, college to professional, highlight clips to full games. At the finest level, it might learn that this particular user is most engaged by content featuring specific teams, players, or narrative angles. This hyper-personalization creates what we might call epistemic individualization. Each person inhabits a unique information environment shaped by their particular profile and behavioral history. Two people using the same platform will see substantially different content, even if they follow the same accounts or subscribe to the same sources. The algorithm mediates all content through its predictive models, determining not just what appears, but in what order, with what prominence, and with what contextualizing information. The platform becomes less a neutral distribution channel and more an active collaborator in constructing each user's reality. The feedback loops inherent in these systems amplify their power over time. When the algorithm shows a user content predicted to engage them, and the user does indeed engage with that content, this confirms the algorithm's model and increases the probability that similar content will be shown in the future. Conversely, content that is shown but not engaged with is deprioritized. Over time, these feedback loops push users toward increasingly narrow content niches. A person who occasionally watches political content might gradually be shown more and more political content as the algorithm learns this generates engagement.
Within the political category, the algorithm might determine that certain perspectives generate more engagement than others and increasingly prioritize those perspectives.
Eventually, the user's feed becomes dominated by a particular type of political content, not because the user explicitly sought this outcome, but because the algorithmic optimization process systematically narrowed their exposure. The velocity of algorithmic curation also matters enormously. These systems operate in real time, making thousands of decisions per user per day. Content recommendations are continuously updated based on the most recent behavioral signals. This creates a dynamic, responsive environment that adapts faster than human consciousness can track. A single click or moment of attention can immediately influence what content appears next, creating tight coupling between user behavior and algorithmic response. This rapid feedback makes the system highly effective at maintaining engagement, but also makes it difficult for users to understand how their own behavior shapes their information environment. The scale of these systems defies human comprehension. Platforms like YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter serve billions of users, processing billions of interactions daily. The algorithmic systems must make trillions of micro-decisions about what content to surface to whom and when. No human editorial board could possibly manage curation at this scale. The algorithmic approach is thus not merely a convenience, but a necessity for platforms operating at internet scale. However, this necessity does not eliminate the profound questions about what values these systems embody and what effects they produce. The business models that fund these platforms create specific incentives that shape algorithmic behavior. Most major platforms generate revenue primarily through advertising, and advertising revenue depends on user attention. The more time users spend on the platform, the more opportunities to show advertisements, and the more revenue generated. This creates a structural imperative to maximize engagement, which in turn shapes the objective functions that algorithms optimize. The algorithm is not neutral, but is designed to serve particular commercial interests, keeping users scrolling, clicking, and returning for more. Have you ever paused to wonder what thoughts, perspectives, and possibilities have been quietly filtered out of your life by systems designed not to inform you, but to hold your attention? These advertising-driven incentives create what technology critic Tristan Harris calls the race to the bottom of the brainstem. Platforms compete to hijack human attention, using increasingly sophisticated psychological techniques.
The algorithm learns to trigger curiosity gaps, to create anxiety about missing out, to deliver unpredictable rewards that activate dopamine pathways, to present social comparisons that generate status concerns. These techniques are extraordinarily effective at capturing attention, but may not serve users' long-term interests or contribute to individual flourishing or social well-being. The algorithmic shaping of information environments has concrete political consequences. During election periods, the content that algorithms choose to amplify can influence which issues seem most important, which candidates receive attention, and how events are interpreted. Studies have demonstrated that algorithmic manipulation of search results can shift the voting preferences of undecided voters by significant margins. The power to determine what information reaches voters represents a form of political influence that operates largely outside democratic accountability or public awareness. Beyond electoral politics, algorithmic curation shapes public discourse more broadly. The topics that trend on platforms, the perspectives that dominate discussions, the sources that gain credibility, all are partly determined by algorithmic amplification patterns. Information that generates engagement gets amplified, creating visibility and apparent legitimacy. Information that does not fit algorithmic preferences remains obscure, regardless of its accuracy or importance. This creates a selection pressure on content creators to optimize for algorithmic preferences rather than traditional journalistic or scholarly standards. The geographic and cultural dimensions of algorithmic curation also deserve attention. While these systems claim to be globally relevant, they are typically designed by teams concentrated in a few geographic locations, primarily California's Silicon Valley.
The assumptions, values, and blind spots of these designers inevitably shape algorithmic behavior. What counts as harmful content? What topics are considered sensitive? What sources are deemed credible? These judgments reflect particular cultural perspectives that may not translate well to different contexts. The algorithmic cave thus tends to reconstruct and reinforce the perspectives of those with the power to design its architecture. The temporal dimension of algorithmic curation creates additional concerns. These systems prioritize novelty and recency, systematically deprioritizing older content, regardless of its enduring value. This creates a perpetual present tense, an eternal now, where historical context and accumulated knowledge are difficult to access.
The algorithm treats today's viral video and yesterday's viral video as categorically different content, not because one is more important or accurate than the other, but simply because recency itself is a key engagement predictor. This temporal bias makes it difficult to maintain collective memory or to learn from past events. The question of algorithmic accountability remains largely unresolved. These systems operate as private infrastructure owned by corporations whose primary responsibility is to shareholders rather than the public. The algorithms are considered proprietary trade secrets protected from external scrutiny. Users have minimal transparency into why they see particular content or how their data is being used. Researchers and journalists face significant barriers to investigating algorithmic behavior. Regulators struggle to even understand these systems, let alone effectively govern them. The prisoners of the algorithmic feed thus lack even basic knowledge about the mechanisms that construct their informational reality. Efforts to reform or regulate these systems face substantial challenges. The machine learning techniques that power recommendation algorithms are genuinely complex, and identifying harmful patterns or biases requires sophisticated technical analysis. The global scale of these platforms complicates regulatory jurisdiction. The rapid pace of technological change means that regulations can become obsolete before they are even implemented. Perhaps most fundamentally, there is no clear consensus about what principles should guide algorithmic curation or what values these systems should optimize beyond engagement and profit. Some have proposed alternative models, algorithms that optimize for truth rather than engagement, for diversity of perspective rather than confirmation of existing beliefs, for long-term well-being rather than immediate attention capture. However, implementing such alternatives raises difficult questions. How do we define truth in contested domains? Who decides what constitutes healthy diversity? Can algorithms be designed to promote human flourishing when we lack consensus about what flourishing means? These are not merely technical problems, but fundamental philosophical and political questions that algorithmic systems cannot answer on their own. The algorithmic shaping of information represents perhaps the most powerful reality construction apparatus ever created. Unlike Plato's cave, where the shadows were crude and limited, the algorithmic cave can present rich, compelling, individually tailored realities that adapt continuously to maintain their hold on attention.
Unlike physical chains, algorithmic bonds are invisible and may even be experienced as freedom, the freedom to see relevant content, to have information personalized, to avoid content that challenges or disturbs. The prisoners of the feed are not struggling against their bonds, but are typically unaware they are bound at all. This invisibility, this naturalization of algorithmic mediation makes the contemporary cave far more effective than Plato could have imagined. We have not escaped the cave, we have perfected it. Shadows of reality, likes, trends, and manufactured truth. In Plato's cave, the shadows on the wall were at least shadows of real objects, distorted and simplified, but retaining some connection to actual things existing behind the prisoners. The digital shadows that populate our screens often lack even this tenuous relationship to reality. What appears on social media feeds, trends on platforms, and circulates through digital networks is frequently not a representation of reality at all, but a manufactured simulacrum, a copy without an original, an image that refers only to other images, a reality effect produced through purely social and algorithmic mechanisms. The architecture of social media platforms is fundamentally oriented around engagement metrics that translate human attention and response into quantifiable data.
The like button, perhaps the most influential interface element ever designed, reduces the complexity of human response to a binary signal, approval or indifference. This reduction has profound epistemic consequences. Complex truth that resist easy judgment, nuanced arguments that require careful consideration, important information that challenges or disturbs, all of these perform poorly in like-based economies of attention. Content optimized for likes tends toward the simple, the emotionally immediate, the confirmationary, and the tribal. The like functions as a vote in an ongoing popularity contest where visibility is allocated based on accumulated approval. Content that receives many likes is algorithmically amplified, reaching more users, generating more opportunities for engagement, and potentially accumulating even more likes in a positive feedback loop. This creates strong selection pressure for content that appeals to the lowest common denominator or that speaks powerfully to particular communities. The effect is similar to evolutionary pressure in biological systems. Content that survives and reproduces in the attention ecosystem is that which has been optimized for engagement metrics, not for truth, importance, or social value. The dynamic of trending topics illustrates how digital platforms construct apparent consensus and shared reality from aggregated microbehaviors.
When a topic begins to trend, this creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. People see that others are discussing this topic, assume it must be important, and join the conversation, further amplifying the trend. The platform's trending designation itself becomes newsworthy, with media outlets reporting on what is trending, thereby legitimizing the platform's algorithmic determination of importance. Reality and representation collapse into one another. The trend becomes the story, the metric becomes the meaning. Crucially, trends are not neutral reflections of public interest, but are shaped by platform design choices, algorithmic processing, and deliberate manipulation. Platforms must decide how to weight different signals when determining trends. Should 1,000 accounts with low follower counts generate the same trending status as 10 accounts with large followings? Should repeated posts from the same account count equally with posts from diverse sources? Should the platform account for geographic concentration versus distributed interest? Each of these technical decisions embodies value judgments about what constitutes genuine public interest versus artificial amplification. Moreover, trending mechanisms are vulnerable to coordinated manipulation. Groups can deliberately engineer trends through synchronized posting, hashtag campaigns, and bot networks. State actors, political organizations, marketing firms, and activist groups all engage in trend manipulation, attempting to create the appearance of organic grassroots interest in topics that serve their strategic objectives. The resulting trend may represent not genuine public conversation, but successful astroturfing, manufactured consensus designed to shape rather than reflect public opinion. The verification mechanisms that platforms employ to distinguish authentic from inauthentic trends are themselves opaque and imperfect. Platforms claim to filter out bot activity and coordinated inauthentic behavior, but these systems operate as black boxes, with limited transparency about how they function or what they catch. Furthermore, the line between authentic and inauthentic is often blurred. Is a social media manager posting on behalf of an organization authentic? What about employees encouraged to share company content, or activists coordinating messaging as part of a legitimate political campaign? The categories themselves resist clear definition. The concept of virality represents another mechanism through which digital platforms construct manufactured reality. When content goes viral, it spreads rapidly through networks of sharing, reaching audiences far beyond the original poster's followers.
Virality is often discussed using metaphors of disease or natural phenomena, as though it were an organic process beyond human control. However, viral spread is neither random nor natural. It is shaped by algorithmic amplification, network structure, timing, and content optimization strategies. Content creators now deliberately engineer for virality, studying the formulas that maximize shareability. Emotional hooks, controversial framings, us versus them narratives, shocking revelations, inspirational stories with clear moral lessons. These are the genres that viral content tends to adopt. The result is a media ecosystem where content is reverse engineered from engagement metrics, where the goal is not to accurately represent reality, but to maximize circulation. The viral shadow is optimized for replication, not for correspondence with truth. The phenomenon of social proof further complicates the relationship between digital metrics and reality.
Humans are social creatures who look to others for cues about how to interpret ambiguous situations and what beliefs to hold. In physical environments, we observe actual behavior, how many people are in a restaurant, whether our neighbors have solar panels, which books our friends are reading. In digital environments, we observe metrics, follower counts, like totals, view numbers, trending indicators. These metrics function as social proof, signaling what is popular, credible, or important. However, digital metrics are far more manipulable than physical observations and far less reliable as indicators of genuine quality or truth. Follower counts can be purchased, likes can be generated by bots, view counts can be inflated through automated systems, trending status can be engineered through coordination. Even when metrics are not deliberately manipulated, they reflect algorithmic amplification patterns rather than organic human interest. The social proof that users rely upon to navigate the digital information landscape is thus fundamentally unreliable, yet remains powerfully influential in shaping perceptions of reality. The performative dimension of social media creates additional layers of manufactured reality. Users do not simply share information or express opinions, they perform identity, signal affiliation, and engage in reputation management. The content that individuals post is carefully curated to present particular self-images: successful, informed, morally upright, culturally sophisticated, politically engaged.
This curation extends beyond obvious cases like influencers building personal brands to include ordinary users presenting idealized versions of their lives and beliefs. The aggregation of these individual performances creates a collective fiction, a digital public sphere where almost everyone is performing and almost everyone knows others are performing. Yet the performance is taken as reality for purposes of social comparison and norm formation. Users compare their lived reality to others' curated performances, generating anxiety, envy, and distorted perceptions of normal life. The shadows on the digital wall are not merely simplified representations, but actively deceptive constructions designed to manage impressions and accumulate social capital. The velocity and volume of information flow in digital environments create additional epistemic problems. Pre-digital information sources operated on slower timescales: daily newspapers, weekly magazines, books published over months or years. This slower pace allowed for verification, reflection, and correction. Digital platforms operate at the speed of immediate publication, where content appears instantly and circulates globally within minutes. This velocity makes systematic fact-checking nearly impossible and allows false information to spread before corrections can catch up. The sheer volume of content compounds this problem. Millions of posts, videos, images, and articles are published daily, far exceeding any individual's capacity to evaluate. Users must rely on heuristics and shortcuts to navigate this information abundance. Does this come from a source I trust? Does this align with my existing beliefs? Do many other people seem to believe this? These heuristics are efficient but unreliable, especially when applied in environments where sources can be easily spoofed, beliefs are systematically reinforced, and popularity can be artificially manufactured. The multimedia nature of digital content adds further complications. Text can be evaluated through traditional literacy skills, assessing argument structure, identifying sources, checking claims. Images and videos are far more viscerally compelling and far more difficult to evaluate critically. A photograph carries an aura of authenticity. We instinctively trust what we can see. Yet digital images can be easily manipulated, decontextualized, or entirely fabricated using increasingly sophisticated tools. Deepfake technology now allows for the creation of convincing fake videos of real people saying things they never said. The shadows on the digital wall can now be indistinguishable from authentic recordings of reality. The fragmentation of authoritative knowledge institutions exacerbates these dynamics.
In earlier eras, certain institutions, universities, major newspapers, scientific academies, government agencies, held privileged epistemic status. Their claims were not automatically accepted, but they enjoyed presumptive credibility based on institutional processes of verification, peer review, and editorial oversight. Digital platforms have flattened epistemic hierarchies, treating the claims of established experts and random anonymous accounts as equivalent content competing for attention. This flattening has democratic elements.
It enables marginalized voices to be heard and challenges unwarranted authority claims. However, it also enables the proliferation of misinformation, conspiracy theories, and pseudoscience. Without shared mechanisms for establishing credibility and adjudicating disputed claims, users are left to determine truth through mechanisms ill-suited to the task: personal judgment, tribal affiliation, and popularity metrics. The result is epistemic chaos, where foundational facts about reality become contested and different communities inhabit incompatible truth worlds. The commercialization of attention creates incentives for the deliberate manufacture of false or misleading content. Fake news sites generate advertising revenue by publishing sensational false stories designed to go viral. Clickbait headlines promise revelations or scandals that the actual content does not deliver, but generate revenue through clicks regardless of user satisfaction. Influencers and content creators optimize for engagement metrics rather than accuracy, understanding that outrage, confirmation, and sensationalism outperform nuance and truth. The shadows are not accidental distortions, but profitable products, manufactured at industrial scale. The psychological impacts of living in this environment of manufactured reality are profound and multifaceted. Users experience what scholars call epistemic insecurity, a fundamental uncertainty about what is real and whom to trust. This insecurity can manifest as reflexive skepticism, rejecting even well-established facts, or as uncritical acceptance of information that confirms prior beliefs. Both responses represent failures of epistemic calibration, distortions in the capacity to accurately assess the reliability of different knowledge sources. The constant exposure to conflicting claims and manufactured outrage generates emotional exhaustion and cynicism. When users cannot determine what is truth, they may conclude that truth itself does not exist, that all claims are equally manipulative, and that sincere communication is impossible.
This cynical stance provides psychological protection against constant uncertainty, but undermines the possibility of constructive public discourse and collective problem-solving. The cave prisoners, unable to distinguish shadows from reality, may conclude that only shadows exist. The social impacts extend beyond individual psychology to collective capacity for democratic deliberation. Democracy requires not just free expression, but shared factual foundations on which disagreement and debate can proceed. When different communities inhabit fundamentally different factual realities, disagreeing not just about values or policies, but about basic empirical questions like whether events occurred, whether photographs are authentic, or what experts actually claim, constructive political discourse becomes nearly impossible. The fragmentation of shared reality threatens the epistemic preconditions for democratic governance. The long-term cultural consequences of manufactured digital reality remain uncertain but potentially severe. If entire generations are raised in environments where the line between authentic and artificial is perpetually blurred, where metrics substitute for meaning, and where performance replaces genuine expression, this may fundamentally alter human capacities for trust, intimacy, and collective action. The skills required to navigate a world of shadows, ironic detachment, strategic self-presentation, cynical sophistication, may become normalized at the expense of sincerity, vulnerability, and epistemic humility. Yet there are also counter-tendencies and sources of resistance. Digital literacy education aims to develop critical evaluation skills adapted to digital environments. Fact-checking organizations work to identify and debunk false claims. Platform design changes attempt to reduce the spread of misinformation. Journalists develop techniques for verification in the digital age. Communities form around commitments to epistemic responsibility and truth-seeking. These efforts represent attempts to see past the shadows, to recognize the manufactured nature of much digital content, and to reconstruct shared standards for assessing truth claims. The challenge is that these counter-tendencies must operate within the same algorithmic systems and attention economies that privilege manufactured content. A careful fact-check competes for attention with sensational false claims and typically loses that competition. Educational interventions reach small audiences, while manipulative content reaches millions.
The structural features of digital platforms, their business models, their optimization for engagement, their scale and velocity, systematically advantage shadows over substance, performance over authenticity, and manufactured consensus over genuine understanding. This creates a situation that Plato would have recognized. The majority prefer the shadows because the shadows are optimized for appeal, because questioning the shadows is difficult and uncomfortable, and because the entire social structure of the cave rewards those who are skilled at navigating the world of shadows rather than those who insist on seeking reality beyond them. The likes, trends, and manufactured truths are not impositions forced upon unwilling victims, but seductive constructions that billions of people willingly consume, share, and reproduce. The shadows have become not just our information environment, but our entertainment, our social life, and our reality. Breaking free requires not just individual enlightenment, but collective transformation of the systems that construct and maintain the digital cave, a transformation that seems increasingly difficult to imagine, much less achieve.
Who controls the fire? Tech giants as modern cave keepers. In Plato's Allegory, the prisoners in the cave cannot see the source of the shadows, the fire burning behind them, or the puppeteers manipulating objects to cast shapes on the wall. The mechanism of illusion remains hidden, and the prisoners have no knowledge of who controls their reality or for what purposes. In our digital age, similar dynamics operate. While users experience the shadows on their screens, the endless feed of content, the algorithmically curated recommendations, the trending topics, they rarely perceive the infrastructure, institutions, and interests that determine what appears and why. Understanding who controls the metaphorical fire of the digital cave and toward what ends they direct it is essential for any comprehensive analysis of contemporary epistemic captivity. The contemporary fire is controlled by a small number of extraordinarily powerful technology corporations. Companies like Meta, parent of Facebook and Instagram, Alphabet, parent of Google and YouTube, ByteDance, parent of TikTok, and Twitter X dominate the digital information landscape, mediating how billions of people communicate, access information, and understand the world. These companies are not governments or public institutions, but private corporations whose primary legal obligation is to maximize shareholder value. This fundamental orientation shapes every aspect of how these platforms operate and what values they embody or neglect. The concentration of power in these few corporations represents a historically unprecedented situation. In earlier media eras, power was distributed across numerous newspapers, television networks, radio stations, and publishers. Even the largest media companies reached only fractions of the global population. Today, Facebook alone has nearly 3 billion active users, more than the population of any nation, more than the entire human population as recently as 1960. These companies serve as primary infrastructure for public discourse, social interaction, and information access across much of the world. The decisions they make about platform design, content moderation, and algorithmic curation affect how billions understand reality. This concentration has occurred through network effects and economies of scale inherent to digital platforms. The value of a social network increases as more people join. The platform becomes more useful as it connects you to more people you know. This creates powerful incentives for users to join the largest platforms rather than alternatives, even if those alternatives might better serve their interests or values.
Similarly, the vast computational resources required for sophisticated recommendation algorithms favor companies with enormous scale and capital. These dynamics create winner-take-all markets where one or a few platforms come to dominate each category. The business model that funds these platforms fundamentally shapes how they operate. With the exception of subscription services, most major platforms generate revenue primarily through advertising. Users access platforms for free, but actually pay by exposing themselves to advertisements and by providing behavioral data that makes targeted advertising possible. This creates specific and powerful incentives. Platforms must maximize user attention. More time on platform means more advertising impressions and more revenue. They must also maximize data collection. Richer user profiles enable more precisely targeted advertising that commands higher prices from advertisers. These advertising-driven incentives are not neutral with respect to content or truth.
The business model creates structural pressure to serve engaging content rather than accurate content, addictive features rather than beneficial features, content that maximizes time on platform rather than content that serves user well-being or public interest. When faced with trade-offs between user welfare and engagement metrics, the profit motive systematically favors engagement. This is not necessarily because platform executives are malicious, but because they operate within competitive markets where failure to maximize engagement means losing users to competitors and losing revenue to shareholders. The governance structures of these corporations further concentrate control. Unlike democratic institutions where authority is distributed and accountable to citizens, corporations operate hierarchically, with ultimate authority residing in executives and boards of directors accountable primarily to shareholders. Mark Zuckerberg, through a special class of stock, maintains voting control over Meta, despite owning a minority of shares, giving him effective dictatorial power over platforms used by billions. Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter demonstrated how a single individual with sufficient capital can take control of major public infrastructure and reshape it according to personal vision. The cave keepers answer not to the prisoners, but to small groups of investors, and sometimes to their own idiosyncratic preferences. The geographic concentration of these companies also matters. The major technology platforms are overwhelmingly headquartered in the United States, particularly in California's Silicon Valley.
The engineers, designers, and executives who make platform decisions thus come disproportionately from particular cultural contexts and bring particular assumptions, values, and blind spots. What counts as offensive language? What content is newsworthy? What sources are credible? What issues matter? These judgments reflect the perspectives of relatively homogeneous teams operating in specific cultural contexts, but making decisions that affect global populations with vastly different norms and concerns. This creates tensions when platforms attempt to operate across diverse cultural contexts. Content moderation policies developed in Silicon Valley may not align with norms in Southeast Asia, Africa, or the Middle East. Algorithmic determinations of what content is quality or engaging may favor content styles and topics familiar to the developers rather than what resonates in different cultural contexts. The platform becomes an instrument of cultural homogenization, systematically privileging certain types of expression, forms of argument, and value frameworks while marginalizing others. The technical infrastructure these companies control represents another dimension of power. The physical hardware, server farms, fiber optic cables, data centers, through which information flows is privately owned and operated. The software systems, recommendation algorithms, content moderation AI, engagement tracking, are proprietary trade secrets protected from public scrutiny. Users must trust that these systems operate fairly and serve their interests, but have no meaningful ability to verify this trust or hold platforms accountable when it is violated. The infrastructure of public discourse has been privatized with minimal public oversight or democratic accountability. The data these companies collect and control represents immense power as well. Every interaction, every click, pause, search, like, share, and scroll generates data that is captured, stored, and analyzed. Over time, this accumulates into extraordinarily detailed profiles of billions of individuals. Their interests, beliefs, relationships, routines, vulnerabilities, and behavioral patterns. This data is used to predict and influence behavior through targeted content and advertising. It is also potentially available to government surveillance, law enforcement, litigation, and malicious actors if platforms are hacked or coerced. The cave keepers possess comprehensive knowledge of the prisoners, while the prisoners know almost nothing of the cave keepers. The relationship between these technology companies and government authority adds complexity to questions of control. Platforms are subject to government regulation, law enforcement data requests, and political pressure.
In democratic countries, this creates some accountability to public authority. However, it also enables state surveillance and potential censorship. In authoritarian contexts, platforms face pressure to remove content critical of regimes and to provide user data that facilitates political repression. The companies thus serve as intermediaries between state power and populations, sometimes resisting government demands, but often complying, with limited transparency about when and why they cooperate. The market power these companies wield extends beyond their own platforms. They can acquire potential competitors before they become threats, Facebook's acquisitions of Instagram and WhatsApp exemplify this strategy. They can copy features from rivals and use their existing user bases to dominate new product categories. Facebook's introduction of Stories in response to Snapchat or Reels in response to TikTok. They can use their platforms to favor their own products and services over those of competitors. This market dominance means that even innovations developed by others end up controlled by the established giants, further entrenching their position as primary gatekeepers. The relationship between these companies is complex, sometimes competitive, sometimes cooperative. They compete for user attention and advertising revenue. They also share common interests in maintaining light regulatory environments, defending their business models against criticism, and preserving the fundamental structures that enable their profitability. Industry associations and lobbying efforts unite these companies in political advocacy. The apparently competing giants are also united by common commitments to the attention economy and to private, profit-driven control of digital infrastructure. The developers, engineers, and content moderators who implement platform policies represent another layer in the power structure. These workers typically enter their roles with genuine intentions to build useful products and create positive social impact. However, they operate within institutional structures and incentive systems that shape what is possible. A content moderator who disagrees with platform policy may face little choice but to implement it or leave. An engineer concerned about addictive features still faces metrics that reward engagement maximization. The distributed nature of responsibility within large organizations makes it difficult to locate accountability for problematic outcomes, even when no individual intended harm. The technical expertise required to understand how platforms operate creates additional asymmetries of power.
Platform executives and engineers understand algorithmic systems, data analytics, and platform architecture in ways that users, regulators, journalists, and advocates typically do not. This expertise gap makes external accountability difficult. Critics may identify problems but struggle to propose viable solutions, or even to fully articulate what changes would be necessary. The cave keepers possess specialized knowledge that the prisoners lack, making challenges to their authority easy to dismiss as uninformed or technically infeasible. The speed at which these companies can modify platforms also concentrates power. A platform can change its algorithm, update its features, or alter its policies, and deploy these changes to billions of users within hours or days. Users typically have no advance notice, no opportunity from input, and limited recourse if they object. While platforms sometimes reverse changes in response to user backlash, they do so voluntarily, rather than as a result of enforceable rights or procedures. The cave keepers can reshape the cave at will, while the prisoners must adapt to whatever reality is constructed for them. The financial resources these companies command give them significant political power as well. Technology companies spend hundreds of millions of dollars annually on lobbying governments. They fund think tanks and academic research. They provide grants to civil society organizations. They sponsor conferences and policy discussions. This financial influence does not necessarily operate through crude quid pro quo corruption, but through more subtle shaping of policy discourse, determining which questions get asked, which solutions get serious consideration, which experts gain platforms and credibility. The cave keepers finance the very discussions about whether and how the cave should be reformed. The ideological frameworks these companies promote often present their activities as neutral, inevitable, or liberating. Platforms describe themselves as connecting the world, organizing information, or giving people a voice, framing their services in universalist and emancipatory terms. This rhetoric obscures the specific interests served by platforms, the particular values embedded in their design, and the power dynamics their operation creates. By claiming to merely facilitate communication or information access rather than actively shaping discourse, platforms deflect accountability and naturalize their mediation of social reality. Yet, there are also countervailing forces that limit the power of technology companies. Regulatory pressure has increased in recent years, with governments investigating antitrust violations, imposing data protection requirements, and demanding greater content moderation.
Public awareness of platform harms has grown. Alternative platforms have emerged, though most remain far smaller than the dominant players. Workers within these companies have organized to push for ethical changes. Journalists and researchers have exposed problematic practices. These efforts represent attempts to challenge the cave keepers' authority and to subject their power to democratic accountability. The question of whether these private corporations should control essential public infrastructure remains deeply contested. Some argue that platform services are valuable precisely because they are privately operated and competitively provided, suggesting that government regulation or public ownership would be worse. Others contend that the infrastructure of public discourse should be treated as a public utility or common resource, subject to democratic governance rather than profit maximization. This debate raises fundamental questions about the relationship between capitalism, democracy, and the conditions necessary for informed citizenship and genuine freedom. What is clear is that a small number of corporations currently exert extraordinary influence over how billions of humans communicate, access information, and understand reality, influence that would have been unimaginable to previous generations and that lacks clear precedent in human history. These are the modern cave keepers, controlling the fire that casts shadows on billions of screens. Unlike Plato's hypothetical puppeteers, these are real institutions operating for specific purposes according to particular values, and their decisions shape not just individual perception, but collective reality, political discourse, and social organization on a global scale. Understanding this concentration of power is essential for anyone seeking to navigate or resist the constraints of the digital cave. Artificial intelligence and the illusion of choice. One of the most sophisticated mechanisms through which the digital cave maintains its hold on inhabitants is the deployment of artificial intelligence systems that create an elaborate illusion of personal agency and choice. Users feel they are making independent decisions about what content to consume, what perspectives to engage with, and how to spend their time online. In reality, the menu of choices presented to each user has been carefully curated by AI systems designed to maximize engagement while creating the subjective experience of autonomy.
This represents a philosophically novel form of constraint, one that operates not by obviously limiting options, but by invisibly shaping the choice architecture within which decisions occur. The recommendation algorithms that power platforms like YouTube, Netflix, TikTok, and Spotify employ sophisticated machine learning techniques to predict what content individual users will engage with. These systems analyze vast data sets encompassing billions of user interactions, learning patterns about what types of content keep different user segments engaged for extended periods. The AI does not simply match users to content they explicitly request, but actively constructs a personalized stream of suggestions designed to maximize continued attention. The user experiences this as the platform helpfully surfacing interesting content, when in fact the AI is systematically manipulating the information environment to serve platform objectives. The philosophy of choice has long recognized that autonomy requires not just the absence of overt coercion, but the presence of genuine alternatives and the capacity to rationally evaluate options. When the set of options presented to an individual has been filtered and ordered by systems designed to exploit psychological vulnerabilities, the resulting decisions cannot be considered fully autonomous, even if no explicit force is applied. The digital cave employs what we might call libertarian paternalism at scale, presenting choices in ways that predictably shape behavior while maintaining the appearance of individual freedom. Consider how YouTube's recommendation algorithm operates. When a user watches a video, the algorithm must decide what to suggest next from among hundreds of millions of available videos. The system does not simply show random alternatives or even the most popular videos overall. Instead, it predicts which specific videos this particular user is most likely to watch next, based on their history, the histories of similar users, and sophisticated modeling of content characteristics and engagement patterns. The recommended videos appear in a prominent sidebar and automatically queue for sequential viewing, creating a pathway of least resistance that users follow largely unconsciously. Crucially, the algorithm optimizes for engagement rather than for user welfare, learning, or satisfaction. A video that leads users down a rabbit hole of increasingly extreme content generates more watch time than a balanced documentary that concludes definitively. Content that provokes emotional arousal, anger, fear, excitement, typically outperforms more measured analysis.
The algorithm learns these patterns from billions of observations and systematically recommends content with characteristics associated with extended engagement, regardless of whether this serves users' long-term interests or genuine preferences. This creates what researchers have termed algorithmic radicalization, the process by which users exposed to increasingly extreme content develop more radical views without consciously seeking such transformation. A person who watches one video about a political topic may find their recommendations gradually shifting toward more polarized and conspiratorial content because such content generates higher engagement. Over weeks and months of following algorithmic recommendations, the user's information diet becomes progressively more extreme, their views more radical, without any single moment of conscious decision to embrace extremism. The path is paved by AI optimizing for engagement, one recommendation at a time. The personalization of these recommendation systems means that different users following the same initial interest will be led down different paths based on what the algorithm predicts will engage them specifically. One user interested in fitness content might be gradually directed toward healthy, evidence-based exercise information if their engagement patterns suggest this will maximize their time on platform. Another user with different behavioral characteristics might be directed toward extreme bodybuilding content, dangerous supplements, or fitness conspiracy theories because the algorithm predicts these will more effectively capture their attention. The AI thus creates divergent realities customized to individual psychological profiles. The opacity of these AI systems compounds the threat to autonomy. Users cannot inspect the algorithm to understand how recommendations are generated or what objectives the system pursues. They cannot opt out of algorithmic curation without abandoning the platform entirely. They typically do not receive any indication that their feed has been personalized or that alternative content exists but is being systematically filtered from their view. The manipulation occurs invisibly, with users typically attributing their consumption patterns to personal interest rather than algorithmic steering. The sophistication of modern machine learning amplifies these concerns. Earlier recommendation systems relied on relatively simple rules and observable patterns. Contemporary deep learning systems can identify subtle behavioral signals and complex interaction patterns that even expert analysts cannot articulate. The AI might discover that users who watch certain video sequences at particular times of day are especially susceptible to particular types of content. It might learn that users in certain emotional states, detected through subtle behavioral signals, are more likely to engage with provocative material. The system then systematically exploits these patterns in ways that exceed human understanding. The use of AI for content moderation introduces additional complexities regarding choice and autonomy. Platforms employ machine learning systems to detect and remove prohibited content, hate speech, violent material, misinformation, copyright violations. These systems operate at scale impossible for human moderators, processing millions of posts daily and removing content that violates platform policies. However, AI moderation systems are imperfect, both over-removing content through false positives and under-removing through false negatives. More troublingly, the specific boundaries these systems enforce reflect choices made by platform companies, often with limited transparency or public input. When an AI system removes a user's post for violating community standards, this represents a restriction on expression implemented by algorithmic judgment. The user may not understand why their content was flagged, may have no effective appeal process, and may be subject to inconsistent enforcement, where similar content from other users remains visible. The automation of moderation creates efficiency at the cost of due process, and the opacity of AI decision-making makes it nearly impossible to identify or challenge bias in how rules are applied across different communities and perspectives. The AI systems used for targeted advertising represent another domain where machine intelligence constrains autonomy. These systems analyze user data to predict which advertisements are most likely to generate desired behaviors, clicks, purchases, signups. The resulting ads are not randomly selected, but specifically chosen to exploit individual vulnerabilities and psychological triggers. A user struggling with body image might receive ads for weight loss products. A person experiencing financial stress might see ads for predatory loans. The AI identifies susceptibility and targets accordingly, raising profound ethical questions about manipulative commercial practices. The temporal dimension of AI influence merits particular attention. These systems do not just affect individual moments of choice, but shape behavior and belief over extended periods through accumulated micro-influences.
Each recommendation slightly shifts attention towards certain types of content. Each ad exposure subtly influences preferences and desires. Each moderation decision marginally adjusts the boundaries of acceptable expression.
Over months and years, these small nudges compound into substantial transformations of what information users encounter, what views they hold, and what actions they take. The AI becomes an invisible architect of consciousness, shaping minds through patient, persistent, personalized influence. The predictive capabilities of advanced AI systems create new possibilities for preemptive manipulation. If a system can predict with high confidence that a user is likely to become interested in a particular topic, it can begin surfacing related content before the user has consciously developed that interest. The AI can identify early indicators of changing political views, emerging health concerns, relationship difficulties, or consumer needs, and begin tailoring content to either reinforce or redirect these developments according to platform objectives. This represents influence that operates not just on existing preferences, but on their formation and evolution. The use of AI to generate synthetic content, deepfakes, AI-generated text, artificial images, introduces additional layers of illusory choice. Users may engage with content believing it to be authentic human creation when it is actually machine-generated, optimized for engagement through iterative testing. AI-generated comments and posts can create false impressions of consensus or controversy. Synthetic personas can participate in discussions, influencing real users' perceptions of popular opinion. The boundary between authentic human expression and algorithmic simulation becomes increasingly difficult to discern. The integration of large language models into platforms create new mechanisms for AI-mediated reality. Chatbots and AI assistants that help users draft posts, search for information, or explore topics inevitably reflect the values, biases, and objectives embedded in their training. When users rely on AI to help formulate their own thoughts or to interpret information, they outsource aspects of cognition to systems designed primarily to be helpful and engaging, rather than to promote critical thinking or accurate understanding. The AI becomes not just a tool, but a collaborator in thought itself, one whose influence is subtle but pervasive. The competitive dynamics between AI systems operated by different platforms create arms races in manipulation. Each platform seeks to deploy more sophisticated algorithms that more effectively capture attention and shape behavior than competitors. Machine learning systems can discover novel psychological vulnerabilities and exploit them before humans even recognize these vulnerabilities exist.
The result is an escalating competition in behavioral engineering, where platforms continuously develop more powerful techniques for influencing users with minimal consideration for long-term individual or social consequences. The question of whether users meaningfully consent to this AI-mediated environment is deeply problematic. Terms of service documents that users must accept to access platforms run to thousands of words of legal language that few read and fewer understand. Even if users technically agree to algorithmic curation and behavioral tracking, this agreement occurs within contexts of limited alternatives and asymmetric information. Users cannot negotiate platform terms, cannot opt out of specific features while retaining access, and typically lack the technical knowledge to understand what they are actually agreeing to. Consent under such conditions is questionable at best. The democratic implications of AI-driven information environments are profound. Democracy requires citizens capable of independent judgment, exposed to diverse perspectives, and able to rationally deliberate about public issues. When AI systems systematically personalize information environments in ways that confirm existing beliefs, when they amplify emotionally provocative content over careful analysis, when they create filter bubbles that prevent exposure to alternative viewpoints, they undermine the epistemic preconditions for democratic citizenship. The cave constructed by AI is not just an individual epistemic prison, but a threat to collective self-governance. The difficulty of regulating or reforming these AI systems compound all of these concerns. The technical complexity makes oversight challenging even for experts. The rapid pace of AI development means systems evolve faster than regulatory frameworks can adapt. The global nature of platforms complicates jurisdictional questions.
The opacity of machine learning models resists interpretability and accountability. Even well-intentioned reforms face immense practical difficulties in implementation and enforcement against companies with vast resources and expertise. Some argue that AI recommendation systems enhance rather than constrain autonomy by helping users discover content they would not have found otherwise, and by filtering overwhelming information abundance down to manageable streams. This view suggests that algorithmic curation is a necessary and valuable service in an age of information overload. However, this defense depends on the assumption that the AI serves user interests rather than platform commercial objectives, an assumption contradicted by the fundamental business model of advertising-funded platforms. Alternative visions of AI-mediated information environments are possible.
Algorithms could optimize for user-defined goals rather than engagement metrics. Recommendation systems could prioritize accuracy and importance over emotional appeal. AI could be designed to expose users to diverse perspectives rather than to reinforce existing beliefs. Machine learning could serve as a tool for enhancing human agency rather than as a mechanism for behavior manipulation. However, implementing such alternatives requires fundamental changes to platform business models and governance structures, changes that powerful incumbent companies have strong incentives to resist. The philosophical implications are striking. We have created artificial minds more sophisticated than any previous technology, embedded them in the infrastructure of daily life, and granted them extraordinary power over human attention, belief, and behavior. These AI systems operate according to objectives we have specified: maximize engagement, predict behavior, optimize outcomes. But they pursue these objectives in ways that exceed our understanding and potentially subvert our values. We have built the most sophisticated cave-keeping apparatus in history, an artificial intelligence that constructs personalized realities optimized for captivity, and we have largely done so without recognizing the profound implications for human autonomy, dignity, and freedom. The illusion is not just in the content the AI serves, but in the belief that we remain the authors of our own choices within an environment meticulously designed to predictably shape those choices toward ends we did not choose and may not endorse.
Echo chambers, when reality becomes personalized. The final dimension of the digital cave that demands rigorous philosophical examination is the fragmentation of shared reality into personalized echo chambers, enclosed epistemic environments where individuals are predominantly exposed to information and perspectives that confirm their existing beliefs, while being systematically shielded from contradictory evidence or alternative viewpoints. This phenomenon represents perhaps the most profound departure from Plato's original allegory, where his cave imprisoned all its inhabitants in a single shared illusion. The contemporary digital cave creates millions of separate micro-caves, each containing its own version of reality, its own set of shadows, its own truth world that may be fundamentally incompatible with the truth worlds inhabited by others. The concept of an echo chamber describes an information environment where beliefs are amplified and reinforced through repetition, and where dissenting views are absent or dismissed within those communities. The metaphor suggests a space where one's own voice echoes back, creating the impression of widespread agreement and validation. In digital contexts, echo chambers emerge through the interaction of several mechanisms: algorithmic personalization that surfaces content aligned with user preferences, self-selection into like-minded communities, and social dynamics that reward conformity and punish dissent within those communities. The result is information environments that systematically lack the diversity of perspective necessary for genuine critical inquiry and rational belief revision. The algorithmic contribution to echo chamber formation operates through the content curation mechanisms discussed earlier. Recommendation algorithms learn what types of content each user engages with and systematically prioritize similar content in the future.
If a user consistently engages with content expressing particular political views, the algorithm interprets this as a preference signal and increases the prominence of similar viewpoints while deprioritizing contradictory perspectives.
Over time, the user's feed becomes progressively more homogeneous, dominated by a narrow band of opinion presented as though it represents general consensus or obvious truth. This algorithmic sorting is not typically intentional bias against particular viewpoints, but rather an artifact of optimizing for engagement. Users tend to engage more readily with content that confirms their beliefs than with content that challenges them. Confirmation feels validating, while contradiction creates cognitive dissonance and discomfort. The algorithm, detecting this pattern, concludes that the user prefers confirmatory content and adjusts recommendations accordingly. What is actually being optimized is continued attention, but the consequence is the construction of an increasingly insulated information environment. The self-selection dimension of echo chambers reflects users' active choices to follow certain accounts, join particular groups, and subscribe to specific sources. People naturally gravitate toward communities and content creators who share their values, interests, and perspectives. This is not inherently problematic. It is reasonable to seek out like-minded others and to engage with perspectives one finds compelling. However, when this self-selection occurs within algorithmic environments that amplify its effects, and when alternatives are increasingly difficult to encounter, the result is not just preference-based association, but epistemic isolation. Social media platforms facilitate the formation of identity-based communities organized around shared beliefs, values, or interests. These communities develop their own norms, vocabularies, and authorities.
Within a given community, certain claims become treated as self-evident truths, certain sources as credible, certain arguments as decisive. Members who express doubt about community consensus face social sanctions, criticism, ostracism, or expulsion. These social dynamics create pressure toward conformity and make it socially costly to revise beliefs in light of external evidence. The echo chamber becomes not just an information environment, but a social world with its own reality construction processes. The dynamics of political polarization exemplify echo chamber effects with particular clarity. Users who consume news primarily from sources aligned with one political perspective develop understanding of events, issues, and even basic facts that diverge substantially from users in different echo chambers. What one group considers a scandal, another considers a non-story. What one treats as credible evidence, another dismisses as propaganda. These divergences compound over time, as each group's beliefs become increasingly specialized and internally coherent, while becoming increasingly incompatible with the beliefs of other groups. Research on echo chambers has documented how these segregated information environments can lead to radicalization. Within a community united by particular beliefs or grievances, more extreme voices can gain prominence if they generate engagement and align with community values. Moderate positions may be dismissed as weak or compromised. Voices urging caution or nuance may be accused of insufficient commitment. These social dynamics within echo chambers can thus create ratchet effects, where the acceptable range of opinion within the community shifts progressively toward more extreme positions, with no countervailing force to moderate these shifts. The epistemic consequences of echo chambers are severe.
Rational belief formation requires exposure to counterarguments, consideration of alternative explanations, and willingness to revise beliefs in light of evidence. Echo chambers systematically obstruct these rational processes. Counterarguments are absent or presented only in weakened strawman forms. Alternative explanations are not considered. Evidence that contradicts community consensus is dismissed as biased, fabricated, or produced by enemies. Under these conditions, beliefs become increasingly disconnected from reality, sustained purely by internal group validation, rather than correspondence with external facts. The phenomenon of motivated reasoning, the tendency to evaluate evidence in ways that support desired conclusions, is amplified within echo chambers. When most information encountered confirms existing beliefs, this appears to validate those beliefs and increases confidence. When occasional contradictory information appears,
it can be dismissed as anomalous or unreliable, since it conflicts with the overwhelming weight of confirmatory evidence in the user's information environment. The echo chamber thus creates a self-reinforcing epistemic trap, where confidence increases even as the basis for that confidence becomes narrower and more biased. The fragmentation of shared reality poses fundamental challenges for democratic discourse and collective decision-making. Democracy depends on citizens sharing enough common factual understanding to disagree productively about values and policies. When different groups inhabit fundamentally different factual realities, when they cannot agree on what events occurred, what evidence shows, or what experts actually claim, constructive political debate becomes nearly impossible. Echo chambers transform policy disagreements into conflicts with incompatible worldviews, making compromise or consensus appear as betrayal of truth rather than as legitimate political accommodation.
The role of trusted intermediaries and authority figures within echo chambers deserves attention. Each echo chamber typically develops its own set of credible sources and authoritative voices, particular journalists, commentators, academics, or public figures whose claims are treated as reliable within that community, while being dismissed or unknown outside it. These authorities serve valuable functions within their communities, helping to interpret events and arbitrate disputes about facts or meanings. However, when these authority structures are completely separate across different echo chambers, with no shared sources that all groups consider credible, the basis for resolving factual disputes across communities collapses. The temporal persistence of echo chambers makes them particularly concerning. Brief exposure to a homogeneous information environment might have limited long-term effects. However, when users spend years receiving information primarily from sources within their echo chamber, this shapes not just specific beliefs, but fundamental cognitive habits, evaluative frameworks, and epistemic standards. Users develop highly specialized knowledge within their chamber's domains of concern, while remaining ignorant of topics emphasized elsewhere. They become skilled at arguments that resonate within their community, while unfamiliar with how to engage productively with those outside it. The generational aspect of echo chambers raises additional concerns. Young people developing their political consciousness and worldviews within strongly echo-chambered information environments may never develop the capacity to engage productively across lines of difference. If one's formative exposure to political discourse occurs entirely within contexts where disagreement is treated as moral failure and alternative perspectives are absent or demonized, this may produce adults who lack the cognitive and emotional tools for pluralistic democratic citizenship.
The cave becomes not just a prison, but a school that teaches inhabitants to reject the very possibility of reality beyond the shadows. The relationship between echo chambers and truth is complex. Not all echo chambers are equally disconnected from reality. Some communities maintain high epistemic standards, value evidence and argument, and generate reliable understanding within their domains. Academic specialties, professional communities, and serious intellectual movements often exhibit echo chamber characteristics: shared assumptions, internal authorities, specialized language, while still tracking truth effectively. The problem is not community formation per se, but the combination of epistemic closure with low standards for evidence and argument. This suggests that the issue is not simply exposure to diverse viewpoints, but the quality of epistemic practices within communities. A community that values evidence, welcomes challenges to its assumptions, and subjects its authorities to scrutiny can maintain epistemic rigor even with relatively homogeneous membership. Conversely, a community with diverse membership can still exhibit echo chamber dynamics if dissenting voices are silenced and if beliefs are maintained through social pressure rather than evidence. Echo chambers are thus not defined by homogeneity alone, but by the combination of homogeneity with deficient epistemic practices. The proposed solutions to echo chamber problems face significant challenges. Algorithmic changes that expose users to more diverse content often reduce engagement and risk users abandoning platforms for competitors that more effectively cater to preferences.
Even when users are exposed to contradictory information, research shows this can paradoxically strengthen original beliefs through a phenomenon called the backfire effect. When confronted with disconfirming evidence, people sometimes dig in further rather than revising beliefs.
Simply breaking echo chambers does not automatically produce more rational belief formation. The cultivation of intellectual virtues, epistemic humility, curiosity, willingness to revise beliefs, appreciation for complexity, represents a more fundamental approach to echo chamber problems. However, these virtues conflict with engagement-maximizing platform design and with tribalistic psychological tendencies that served evolutionary functions in small-scale societies. Developing such virtues require educational interventions, cultural changes, and platform designs that prioritize long-term epistemic health over short-term engagement, transformations that seem unlikely absent major structural reforms. The question of whether some degree of echo chamber formation is inevitable or even necessary remains unresolved. Human cognitive limitations mean we cannot engage meaningfully with all available information and must selectively attend to certain sources and perspectives. Communities of inquiry require shared assumptions and frameworks that enable productive dialogue. The alternative to echo chambers is not universal exposure to everything, but rather some other form of selective attention and community formation. The challenge is to achieve selection and community in ways that preserve critical epistemic functions, rather than in ways that systematically distort understanding. Plato's cave contained prisoners who shared the same shadows and could at least agree on what they were seeing, even if they mistook shadows for reality. The digital age has shattered this shared illusion into millions of fragments, each a separate cave with its own shadows, its own version of events, its own incompatible reality. The prisoners in one cave cannot even communicate meaningfully with prisoners in another. They lack shared language, shared authorities, shared facts to serve as common ground. This fragmentation may represent an even more profound form of captivity than Plato imagined. Imprisonment not just in illusion, but in mutually incomprehensible and incommensurable illusions, each person trapped not only by their limited perspective, but by the impossibility of recognizing or accessing the perspectives of others. The personalization of reality through algorithmic echo chambers does not merely constrain individual knowledge, it threatens the very possibility of collective understanding, shared truth, and the common world that politics requires. When reality itself becomes personalized, we do not merely inhabit a cave, we inhabit separate caves, calling out to others across distances that may be unbridgeable, our voices echoing back to us as though they were the voices of the world. Truth versus virality, why the loudest voice feels like reality. In Plato's original Allegory of the Cave, presented in Book 7 of the Republic, prisoners chained from childhood know only the shadows cast upon the wall before them. These shadows, mere projections of objects passing before a fire behind them, constitute the entirety of their perceived reality. The prisoners, having never experienced anything else, naturally mistake these illusions for truth. They develop expertise in predicting shadow patterns, conferring honors upon those most skilled at this prediction, never suspecting that what they study so intently represents only the faintest echo of actual reality. This ancient parable finds disturbing resonance in our contemporary digital landscape, where the mechanics of virality have fundamentally altered our relationship with truth. In 2025, we find ourselves in a cave of unprecedented sophistication, where algorithmic systems determine not merely what information reaches us, but how we understand truth itself. The shadows on our walls are no longer cast by firelight, but by recommendation algorithms, engagement metrics, and artificial intelligence systems designed not to illuminate truth, but to maximize attention. The phenomenon of virality operates according to principles that often stand in direct opposition to the careful, methodical pursuit of truth that has characterized philosophical and scientific inquiry since antiquity.
Viral content spreads not because of its veracity, nuance, or contribution to human understanding, but because of its capacity to trigger emotional responses, confirm existing beliefs, or present information in maximally shareable formats. A carefully researched article examining the complex causes of a social problem, complete with statistical analysis and acknowledgement of uncertainty, competes for attention against a provocative headline that reduces the same issue to a simple narrative of heroes and villains. The latter, almost invariably, achieves greater reach. This creates what we might term an epistemological inversion, where the traditional markers of reliable knowledge, careful sourcing, tentative conclusions, acknowledgement of complexity, become competitive disadvantages in the attention economy. The philosopher and the demagogue no longer operate on equal footing. The structural biases of digital platforms actively favor the demagogue. When truth must compete with falsity for attention, and when the mechanisms of distribution reward emotional resonance over accuracy, truth labors under a systematic handicap. The psychological mechanisms underlying this phenomenon have been extensively documented. Research in cognitive science reveals that human beings possess what psychologists call cognitive fluency bias. We experience ideas that are easy to process as more likely to be true. Viral content, by necessity, simplifies.
It removes nuance, flattens complexity, and presents information in formats optimized for rapid comprehension and emotional impact. A complex geopolitical situation becomes a tweet with a clear villain. A multifaceted scientific debate becomes a shareable infographic with definitive conclusions. The reduction itself, the very act of simplification that enables virality, distorts the underlying reality. Moreover, the social proof inherent in virality creates a powerful feedback loop. When we encounter information that has been shared thousands or millions of times, we unconsciously assign it greater credibility. The sheer volume of engagement serves as a heuristic for truth. This represents a profound shift from traditional epistemic frameworks, where truth claims were evaluated based on evidence, logical coherence, and alignment with established knowledge. In the viral ecosystem, popularity itself becomes a form of evidence. The loudest voice, by virtue of being loud, acquires an aura of authority that may be entirely unearned. The algorithmic amplification of this dynamic introduces additional layers of distortion. Content recommendation systems, trained to maximize engagement, quickly learn that controversial, emotionally charged, or outrage-inducing content generates stronger responses. These systems, lacking any conception of truth or social value, optimize purely for the metrics they are given. The result is a systematic bias toward content that inflames rather than informs, that divides rather than elucidates. The algorithm becomes a megaphone for the most incendiary voices, not because of any intentional malice, but because the mathematical optimization of engagement metrics naturally favors extremity over moderation. Consider the asymmetry between the spread of truth and the spread of falsehood. A false claim, unburdened by the constraints of reality, can be crafted for maximum emotional impact.
It can be perfectly tailored to trigger existing fears, confirm cherished beliefs, or flatter group identities. Truth, constrained by what actually is, cannot always compete on these terms. Sometimes reality is complicated, ambiguous, or unsatisfying. Sometimes the true answer to an important question is we don't know yet, or it depends on multiple factors. Such answers, however honest, do not go viral. The MIT study of social media diffusion, which analyzed millions of Twitter cascades, found that false news spread significantly faster, farther, and deeper than true news across all categories of information. Falsehoods were 70% more likely to be retweeted than truths. This advantage persisted even when controlling for the characteristics of users spreading the information. The structure of viral propagation itself favors falsity. This represents nothing less than an epistemic crisis, a fundamental undermining of our collective capacity to distinguish truth from fiction. The implications extend far beyond individual instances of misinformation.
When virality becomes the primary mechanism through which information reaches us, we collectively become inhabitants of Plato's cave, watching shadows and mistaking them for reality. But unlike Plato's prisoners, we are not passive observers. We are active participants in the shadow casting process, sharing, liking, and commenting in ways that determine which shadows others will see. We become both prisoners and jailers, both deceived and deceivers. This dynamic creates what the philosopher C.T. Nien has termed echo chambers of epistemic authority, environments where the very criteria we use to evaluate truth claims are themselves shaped by the information environment we inhabit. If you exist within a media ecosystem where a particular narrative is constantly reinforced, you do not merely believe that narrative, you come to adopt the epistemic standards that make that narrative appear credible.
The cave does not merely show you false images, it teaches you to see falsely. The loudest voice feels like reality because our evolved psychology did not prepare us for an environment where volume could be so dramatically decoupled from validity. In ancestral environments, information that many people believed and passionately advocated for generally had some basis in shared experience or observation. Broad consensus usually indicated something real. But in our digital cave, volume can be manufactured, consensus can be simulated, and the loudest voices may represent not collective wisdom, but the most sophisticated manipulation of attention mechanics. Furthermore, the velocity of viral spread creates an illusion of immediacy and urgency that bypasses our reflective capacities. When information reaches us with the implicit message that everyone is talking about this right now, we feel pressure to form opinions and take positions before we have time for careful evaluation. The viral phenomenon itself becomes a kind of coercion, demanding our immediate intellectual and emotional response. This stands in stark contrast to the classical philosophical ideal of patient, reflective consideration, the examined life that Socrates insisted was the only life worth living. The commercial imperatives underlying digital platforms intensify these dynamics. Platforms profit from engagement, and engagement is maximized when users are emotionally aroused, whether through outrage, affirmation, fear, or tribalistic satisfaction. Truth, unfortunately, is not optimized for any business model. It does not always engage, does not always satisfy, does not always align neatly with the psychological triggers that keep users scrolling. The pursuit of truth and the pursuit of profit in this context become fundamentally opposed objectives. This is not to suggest that viral content is necessarily false, or that all popular ideas lack merit.
Rather, the point is that virality operates according to principles orthogonal to truth-seeking. Sometimes viral content happens to be true, sometimes it happens to be false, but its virality itself tells us nothing about its veracity. Yet we instinctively treat virality as meaningful, as a signal worth attending to. This instinct, once adaptive, has become a vulnerability in an environment where virality can be engineered. The phenomenon also reveals something troubling about human nature and collective cognition. We are drawn to the loud, the simple, the emotionally resonant. We prefer narratives with clear heroes and villains to complex analyses that implicate multiple parties. We favor information that confirms what we already believe over information that challenges us to revise our understanding. These tendencies, always present, are now systematically exploited by the architecture of our information environment. The philosophical implications are profound. If our primary mechanisms for accessing information are biased towards falsity, if truth is systematically disadvantaged in the competition for attention, then how can we maintain any confidence in our collective beliefs? How can democratic deliberation function when the information citizens receive is filtered through systems that optimize for engagement rather than accuracy? How can we pursue knowledge when the loudest voice, rather than the most careful reasoning, determines what ideas achieve cultural prominence? These questions return us to Plato's original insight, that most of what we take to be knowledge may be mere opinion, that what appears self-evident may be illusion, and that liberation from error requires not just access to better information, but a fundamental transformation in how we relate to knowledge itself. The viral information ecosystem offers us an abundance of shadows, each dancing with increasing sophistication across our screens.
But abundance of shadows does not equal illumination.
Indeed, it may represent a new form of darkness, more seductive and complete than anything Plato imagined.